is Mahidhar Babu in front of you to take you through Accounting Standard 10. Accounting Standard 10, Accounting for Fixed Assets. Accounting for Fixed Assets, which is applicable from 1st April 1993. We need to know the definitions and applicability of this standard. Here definitions. First we should know fixed asset. What is meant by fixed asset? What is meant by fixed asset? Here fixed asset is utilized. Fixed asset is the asset which is held in the business for the purpose of using in the process of production, for the purpose of using in the production of goods or rendering services. Here, which is held in the for the purpose of using in the production, not for the process of production, not for using in the process of production, using in the process of production. What is the difference between for the purpose of production and in the process of production? In the process of production, we are utilizing raw material. In the process of production, that's the main product which is utilizing for converting that into finished good. And here, for the purpose of production, machinery, we are utilizing for the purpose of converting raw material into finished good. Is that correct? Is that right? Now, we are rendering and utilizing for the purpose of rendering services. We are utilizing a motor vehicle. That's for the purpose of providing delivery facility. For the purpose of providing delivery of the goods. And we are utilizing the furniture. Why we are utilizing the furniture? For providing, and here we are, some customers come into our business. We are providing, here some furniture is there. You are coming to class, you are sitting here, as we are having benches. Otherwise, you will stand there and you will listen to class. Are you comfortable in learning the classes? No. Are you comfortable? No. Here we are having comfortability. Otherwise, we are unable to listen the classes properly. This is also, we are providing such assets and we are utilizing such assets in the process for the purpose of rendering services. Those are to be held not for the purpose of resale. Not for the purpose of resale. If you are purchasing an asset, you are purchasing a product and you are selling that immediately. That's of inventory, right? But that should be utilized for more than one accounting period. Fixed asset here, an asset which is acquired for the purpose of utilizing in the production, or for the purpose of rendering services. Furniture, motor vehicle, etc. This is the definition of fixed asset. First we should know what is the applicability of this draft, this accounting standard. Acquisition, incidental to acquisition. If you are getting any amounts any incomes, those are to be deducted from acquisition cost for getting historical cost of the fixed asset. Historical cost of the fixed asset. Are you getting? What are the ingredients here? What are the items here? Acquisition cost, that is nothing but amount paid at the time of acquiring such asset, and any other costs incidental to acquisition, and deduct any incomes incidental to acquisition of such asset. What are the items? What are the costs incidental to acquisition? Import duty and any other taxes which are of non-refundable in nature. And delivery charges and handling charges, site preparation costs, trail run charges, any forex liability, any deviation in forex liability for the purpose of borrowing, for the purpose of acquiring such asset, Are you getting? So government grant should be deducted, right? If you are acquiring the asset by getting some subsidy from the government or by getting some amount as a grant from the government, that's the income incidental to acquisition. That should be deducted from the acquisition cost for getting the historical cost of the acquired asset. Is that clear? This is about this one. And if you acquired the asset for kind, then how can you compute the historical cost? How can you compute the historical cost? You acquired the asset for kind. That means you may give any other asset for acquisition of such asset. Okay. You may give the same kind of asset. You are having festival exchange offers. You are giving your mixer which is available in your home, and you are getting the new mixer. You are getting some exchange difference, right? You are getting some benefit there. Okay. Then how can you account for what is the historical cost of new acquired asset? What are the acquired cost of new acquired asset? That means the historical cost of new acquired asset. How can you compute that one? Are you getting? So kind, maybe if you acquired that asset by giving the similar asset, same example, you are given your mixer, old mixer, and you are getting a new mixer. Old mixer by giving, that means by getting new mixer. Here exchange of similar item. Then how can you account for? What's the cost of the asset? Here you should know fair market value of the asset given or fair market value of asset obtained, asset acquired, whichever is most evident one. You are giving the mixer that's having the market value of 10,000, and there is no clarity about the market value of new acquired asset. Then which one should be followed? Which has to be accounted for? At which value we have to account for? 10,000. Are you getting? If you are, most of the cases, you may have the fair market value of acquiring asset, right? If you are getting the new product, you will have the proper value. You will have the proper market value of new product. For old product, it's difficult to get the fair market value. If it's difficult to ascertain the fair market value, okay, which is most evident should be taken as the asset value. Are you getting? If you acquired the asset which is of not similar one by giving not similar one, other asset, any other asset, then what's the amount of, how can you compute the historical cost? How can you compute the historical cost? Here also you are having something, right? You are issuing that one, you may get the fair market value of such asset, and you are getting something, some asset. For that also you can ascertain the fair market value. Whichever is most evident should be accounted for. Whichever is most evident should be accounted for. Or net realizable value of, that means book value of, if those both are not available. In the case of, if you are providing the similar asset, both are not available, then which value should be accounted for? If you are exchanging the similar asset for getting the new asset, then here you know the fair market value of the asset, you don't know the fair market value of the asset given, and don't know the fair market value of the asset brought in. Okay, then which value you should consider? You are already having the similar asset which is continuing in the business, right? The similar asset which you are giving now, that's having some book value, right? That book value should be considered. In case of similar asset, if you are exchanging for similar asset, then you have to ascertain the market value, fair market value of the asset given, or fair market value of the asset acquired, whichever is most evident, or both are not available, then which is to be considered? The book value of the asset given. The book value of the asset given should be considered. And here, not the similar one. You are exchanging the asset, not the similar one. You are issuing a car and you are purchasing a bus. Then how can you? How can you? That value is different from this one. Similar one means both the values are most equivalent. Both the values are most equivalent, not being the same one. If you are acquiring the Moto piece, Moto G, and you are exchanging your Lenovo YP1, both are having mostly similar values, approximately similar values, and both are similar products. Okay, then you can issue for that. If you are exchanging for not the similar items, then how can you account for? You should know the fair market value of asset given or fair market value of asset acquired, whichever is most evident one. Whichever is most evident one. Is that clear? You are giving some asset and you are getting some asset. Both are not of similar nature. Both are not of similar nature. Then you have to find out. You have to account for those assets at the value which is of the fair market value of the asset given or fair market value of the asset acquired, whichever is most evident. Okay, now you may exchange the asset for shares also, right? That means securities also. Securities are different from fixed assets, right? Securities are different from fixed assets. So here investments for securities, if you are exchanging any asset for securities, which value you have to account for? At which value you have to account for? At which value you have to account for? Here no need to bother about that, right? Same thing. But most of the cases, the share value, that means securities value, can be identified. Antara kadandi? Most of the cases we can find out the securities value, because those are always trading in the market. Those are having fair market value. We can conclude the fair market value easily. Okay, na? But here also the same thing. Fair market value of the asset acquired. You are getting the asset and you are issuing your shares and debentures. Okay, na? You are issuing your securities. Then you can know if those are of secured, that means quoted securities. If you are issuing quoted securities means those are listed in any stock exchange. Their market value can be identified easily. Those are most evident one, right? So those are to be accounted for. At that value you have to account for. Okay, Nandi? So here kind maybe for similar asset, or for the other assets. For the other assets are for issuing, by issuing securities. At that time, how can we account for, how can you compute the historical cost? Is that clear? So in cash, for cash aithe em consider cheyalandi, acquisitions tho paatu costs incidental to acquisition should be considered, and incomes incidental to acquisition should be deducted. Installation costs and also erection costs. What is meant by erection and what is meant by installation? What is meant by installation and what is meant by erection? Erection means you are acquiring the assets with, that means you are not acquiring the asset of assembled one. You have to assemble various parts of the asset in proper manner. For the purpose of assembling the various parts of the asset in the systematic manner, that is said to be the erection. Installation means already assembled one, you have to fix somewhere else for the purpose of utilization. That is said to be installation. These costs are also to be considered as the part of historical cost. As the part of historical cost. Is that clear? So, if self-constructed asset, these are acquired assets from the outside, acquired for cash or for kind. How can we account for those? And next, self-constructed asset. What is meant by self-constructed asset? You are having various ingredients, various items. By utilizing those items, you should prepare an asset, you should construct an asset. Okay, you are purchasing, you are having the land, you are constructing, you are building for the business purpose on your own. Okay, you are not giving contract to any other person. Okay, so you are constructing yourself. Okay, self-constructed asset or in-house constructed asset. You are utilizing your resources only for constructing the asset. Okay, now what are the items should be included in the historical cost? What are the items should be included in the historical cost? You are purchasing some items to construct the asset which are directly attributable to such asset. You should purchase the sand, bricks, okay, iron. Okay, na? These all are you should purchase. Those are direct costs for construction. ఏవైతే మీరు డైరెక్ట్ కాస్ట్ మీరు ఇన్కర్ అయ్యారో పర్టికులర్గా ఆ అసెట్కి సంబంధించి ఆ అమౌంట్స్ అన్నిటినీ కూడా మనం కన్సిడర్ చేయాలి. ఓకేనమ్మా? సో నెక్స్ట్ వన్, you are acquiring some part of items which have been utilized in the process of construction of such asset from your own department. మీ యొక్క బిజినెస్లో వేరే డిపార్ట్మెంట్ నుంచి కొన్ని అసెట్స్ అనేవి పర్చేజ్ చేశారండి, కొన్ని ఐటమ్స్ అనేవి పర్చేజ్ చేశారు. those are also in those items your profit included, right? Your departmental profit included, right? So your profit, your internal profit should be deducted. Internal profits should be deducted. You are utilizing your own product and you are getting that product from other department. The other department's profit may include in the acquisition cost of such items. That interdepartmental profit should be excluded from the cost of the asset. Asset యొక్క కాస్ట్ నుంచి ఎక్స్టర్నల్ డిపార్ట్మెంట్ కాస్ట్ అనేవి డిడక్ట్ చేయాలి. ఓకేనా? ఎనీ అదర్ కాస్ట్, ఎనీ అదర్ కాస్ట్ allocable to construction. Construction టైంలో అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ అండి. Construction టైంలో administration and other expenses, if any, incurred in the entire business, some portion should be allocable to this process. A manager will be there. A manager will be there. He will employ some time for the purpose of construction of such asset. That should be included. Okay. Architecture's amount for the purpose of construction. Architecture will be there for design purpose, for the purpose of designing. Those expenses, any amount payable to such person also to be considered as cost of the asset. Are you getting? Self-constructed asset, any direct costs incurred for the purpose of construction, and from that you should deduct internal profit, if any, included in the aforesaid cost. ముందు చెప్పినటువంటి కాస్ట్లో ఏవైనా సరే ఇంటర్నల్ ప్రాఫిట్స్ కనుక ఇంక్లూడ్ అయి ఉన్నట్లయితే వాటిని ఏం చేయాలండి? దోస్ ఆర్ టు బి డిడక్టెడ్. అండ్ ఆల్సో యూ షుడ్ యాడ్ ఎనీ allocable expenses, allocable indirect expenditure, allocable indirect expenditure, that also should be included. And also any professional charges, all we have earlier mentioned one. Professional charges, architecture charges ఏంటండి? Professional charges అయినా for the purpose of design or any other expenses incurred should be included. Is that clear? This is about historical cost. How can you find out the historical cost? If that is of self-generated asset, if that is of self-generated asset, what are the costs should be? What are the items should be included in the cost of the fixed asset? What are the items should be included? And any internal profit should be deducted. Any internal profit should be deducted. Along with that, any allocable indirect expenses should be considered, and also professional charges should also be considered. In direct expenses, the professional charges also will be there, right? Okay, now these all are to be considered. In case of acquired for cash, these are to be considered. Acquisition cost, any cost incidental to acquisition, and any incomes incidental to acquisition should be deducted. Okay, for kind, here for similar item or for not a similar item, for securities. Okay, na? These are the things. This is about historical cost. Are you getting? Historical cost. What's the next one in the definition? That means in the valuation process, you already know that. How should we account for? How should we account for? What are those? Historical cost are revalued amount. Revalued amount. How can you revalue the asset? What is the treatment of revaluation of such fixed asset? What is the treatment of revaluation of such fixed asset? How can you revalue that asset? How can you revalue those? No. The professional valuer who is competent to revalue can revalue the fixed asset. The professional valuer who is competent to do so can only revalue the competent valuer, professional competent valuers. Okay, now how can they revalue the asset? What are the items should be considered? What are the things should be considered while revaluing the asset? What are to be considered? May be revalued by applying indexation figures. I know indexation. So indexation figures applicable to such asset. ఏ type of asset మీరు revalue చేస్తున్నారు? Which asset you are revaluing? If you are revaluing the machinery, what is the indexation? Indexation number you have to utilize. Okay. If you are revaluing motor vehicle, how can you? What's the indexation number? Indexation figure you have to apply. Okay, na? Based on that may be revalued by utilizing indexation figures. Is there any other way? Here we are saying that may be revalued by applying indexation figures. Any other thing, any other manner, can we revalue the asset? Yes, we are having. Based on the conditions in which you are utilizing the asset. Based on the conditions in which you are utilizing the asset. If you are purchased a shirt, you have purchased a shirt. It's very beautiful one. You are wearing 2 days, 3 days, 4 days continuously. It will be damaged, right? Okay. If you are utilizing regularly, if you are wearing 1 day per week, that means you are utilizing properly. You are using that asset properly. You are wearing once and you are washing that one. Further you are wearing again. Okay. You are utilizing in proper condition. That will be useful for much more time, right? If you are wearing regularly without washing, you are wearing. You are not feeling shy. Okay. Then it will be useful for little time. It will be useful for some time only. Okay, na? At the same situation, if you are utilizing the asset in proper condition, then you can utilize the asset for more period, in long run. Otherwise, if you are utilizing roughly, you are using such asset roughly, then can you utilize for a long run? You have purchased a vehicle, you are not servicing that vehicle, you are not doing any service, you are not incurring any service cost for that vehicle. Can you utilize in long run? No, it will be damaged, it will get damaged, right? So that means if you are utilizing properly, then the value, the benefit will be for much more long period. If you are utilizing that means if you are utilizing roughly, then you will avail the benefits of such asset, the benefits of such asset for little time only. Proper ga use chestunte 10 years use chesaటువంటి vehicle ni మీరు ఎలా పడితే అలా యూజ్ చేస్తే you can utilize for 3 years or 4 years. Afterwards, it will be treated as garbage and should be transferred to dump yard. అంతేనండి. So that should be considered. Okay. So వాటిని కన్సిడర్ చేసుకొని మీరు ఏ కండిషన్లో యూజ్ చేస్తున్నారో వీటన్నిటిని కన్సిడర్ చేసుకొని రీవాల్యూ చేయొచ్చు. ఓకేనా? అండ్ మార్కెట్ వాల్యూ అండ్ రీవాల్యూడ్ ఫిగర్ షుడ్ నాట్ ఎక్సీడ్ ద నెట్ మార్కెట్ వాల్యూ, నెట్ రియలైజబుల్ వాల్యూ ఆఫ్ సచ్ అసెట్. ఐ గెటింగ్? ఇఫ్ యు ఆర్ హ్యావింగ్ ద అసెట్, ఇఫ్ యు మే గెట్ 10,000 by realization of such asset, the revalued figure should not exceed the 10,000. Revalued figure should not exceed the net realizable value, the net realizable value of such asset. That should not exceed the net realizable value of such asset. Is that clear? So how can we account for? You have revalued the asset. You have revalued the asset. How can you account for that revaluation figure? How can you account for that revalued figure? How to revalue? By utilizing indexation figures or by considering certain situations, certain conditions, the professional valuer who is a competent one can revalue the asset. Right? After revaluation, how can we account for the revalued profit or revalued loss? You may get the revaluation profit, right? If you are having the book value of 1 lakh, you are getting the revalued figure as 1,10,000. As 1,10,000. How can you account for the 10,000? How can you account for? If you are having the asset value of 1 lakh and the realized value of, that means revalued portion is 90,000. How can you account for that loss? That's also to be considered, right? That's also to be considered. Now, revaluation of that downward may be downward or upward. Revaluation may be downward or upward. For the first time downward, that's a depreciable asset. That's a depreciable asset or whatever it may be. That's a fixed asset. That's a fixed asset. Here, first time downward revaluation happened. That means you are showing the book value as 1 lakh, but now it's having the value of 90,000 only. 90,000 only. Here you are getting loss, right? Earlier you have to provide additional depreciation of 10,000. You acquired the asset for 2 lakh and you depreciated, the accumulated depreciation on such asset was 1 lakh. Now it's having the book value of 1 lakh. But you have revalued the asset. The revaluation figure was 90,000. That means actually you have to provide the depreciation of 1,10,000, right? But you have provided 1 lakh only. 1 lakh only. Actually you have to provide 1,10,000, but you have provided 1 lakh. That means you need to provide additional 10,000. You need to provide additional 10,000. If you have provided so, then that should be debited to P&L account, right? Already మీరు ప్రొవైడ్ చేసి ఉంటే అది P&L అకౌంట్ డెబిట్ చేసి ఉండేవాళ్ళు. ఇప్పుడు చేశారండి? చేయలేదు. సో ఇప్పుడు ఏం చేయాలి? డెబిటెడ్ టు P&L అకౌంట్. ఫస్ట్ టైం డౌన్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ కనుక జరిగినట్లయితే దట్ షుడ్ బి డెబిటెడ్ టు P&L అకౌంట్. ఐ గెటింగ్? P&L అకౌంట్కి డెబిట్ చేస్తారండి. యాజ్ ఇట్ ఈజ్ లాస్. యాజ్ ఇట్ ఈజ్ లాస్. అండ్ ఫస్ట్ టైం డౌన్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ జరిగిందండి. ఫస్ట్ టైం డౌన్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ జరిగింది. ఇన్ ద సబ్సిక్వెంట్ టైమ్స్, సబ్సిక్వెంట్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ టైంలో అప్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ జరిగిందండి. సబ్సిక్వెంట్లో మరలా డౌన్వర్డ్ జరగచ్చు, అప్వర్డ్ జరగచ్చు. అవునండి? Subsequent revaluation time lo, whether that may be downward revaluation or upward revaluation. If that is of downward revaluation, again we have to provide additional depreciation, but we are not provided. Now we need to provide, right? That should be directly debited to P&L account. That should be directly debited to P&L account. If first time downward revaluation happened, further upward revaluation happen. Okay na? Here this is of downward loss, this is of downward gain. Downward loss or downward profit, upward profit. Again revaluation profit, revaluation loss. Earlier revaluation loss is there, now you are getting revaluation profit. That means earlier, here you should consider if revaluation loss is equal to, less than or equal to, revaluation loss is less than or equal to revaluation profit. Revaluation loss is less than or equal to revaluation profit. Revaluation loss, revaluation profit అంటే రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ తక్కువ ఉంది అనుకోండి, రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ తక్కువ ఉంది అంటే ఇక్కడ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఏమైందండి, ఇట్స్ హ్యావింగ్ మోర్ దాన్ ద రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ విచ్ హావ్ బీన్ రిటర్న్ డౌన్ ఎర్లియర్, విచ్ హావ్ బీన్ రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్ ఎర్లియర్. ఆల్రెడీ దాన్ని రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేసామండి లాస్గా, ఆ లాస్ ఇప్పుడు రికవర్ అవుతుంది. లాస్ వచ్చినప్పుడు ఏం చేసాం, at the time of downward revaluation we have already accounted for as loss and we have debited to P&L account, but we can recover that amount, loss happened, that can be recovered. That means the loss should be written back, right? The loss should be written back. That means we have to credit to P&L account, right? To the extent of revaluation loss written off earlier. Earlier ఏదైతే రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేసామో రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్, that should be written back. That means that amount should be credited to P&L account. Already we have debited to P&L account. That can be recovered, loss can be recovered. That means recovery of loss, that's the income, that should be credited to P&L account. That should be credited to P&L account. Is that clear? In excess of, that means revaluation profit in excess of revaluation loss written off earlier. ఆల్రెడీ రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేసినటువంటి లాస్ కన్నా ఏదైతే ఇప్పుడు అప్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ జరిగేటప్పుడు ప్రాఫిట్ ఎక్కువ ఉందో దాన్ని ఏం చేయాలండి, దట్స్ అ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్, దట్స్ అన్రియలైజ్డ్ ప్రాఫిట్, దట్స్ a future probable gain, right? In future we may get extra benefit than the available amount. You are having the asset value of 1 lakh, you may get 1,10,000. That means you may get the future benefit. Which concept we have to follow here? Which concept we have to consider here? Conservatism concept, right? It's a future probable gain. Can you recognize that? Can you consider it as a P&L account? That means directly, can you consider to P&L account? No. Okay. You have to raise the revaluation reserve. That's not the realized one. But you already revalued the asset by the professional and competent value. You can recognize that as separate one, but should not be considered as a realized one and should not be considered in P&L account. Are you getting? You didn't realize that one. That should be treated as a revaluation reserve. That should be shown under reserves and surplus head on the liability side of the balance sheet. That should be shown under reserves and surplus head, which is of owner's funds. Reserves and surplus head on the liability side of the balance sheet. Are you getting? Further, here if revaluation loss is greater than revaluation profit, earlier you have written off 15,000, earlier you have written off as revaluation loss 15,000, but you are revaluing upward again for 10,000. Okay, by 10,000 you are revaluing upward. That means earlier written off revaluation loss was 15,000, but now you are having the revaluation profit of 10,000. That means some portion of earlier loss have been, that means we are getting some portion of revaluation loss which have been written off. That means entire amount can be directly credited to P&L account, right? Entire revaluation profit can be credited to P&L account. Entire revaluation profit can be credited to P&L account, right? Already we have debited 15,000, but we are recovering only 10,000 of that 15,000. We are recovering 10,000 of that 15,000. That means we are recovering a portion of loss which have been written off. That can be directly credited to recovery of loss. Can be directly credited to P&L account. Directly credited to P&L account. Now, upward revaluation. First time. Further we are revaluing upward. Okay. But here already revaluation loss is there. To the extent of revaluation loss, we have to write it off. Okay. Any other portion should be credited to revaluation reserve. In the same manner, here if we are revaluing first time, then that should be credited to revaluation reserve account. Revaluation reserve account. That means what's the entry? What's the entry? Revaluing the asset upward. That means asset value is going to increase, right? Asset account debit to revaluation reserve. This should be mentioned on the liability side of the balance sheet under the head reserves and surplus. Okay, now this is a first time revaluation. First time upward revaluation. Again, first time upward revaluation jarigindi. Further ga subsequent revaluation lo upward ఉండొచ్చు, downward ఉండొచ్చు. అంతేనా కాదండి? upward ఉండొచ్చు, downward ఉండొచ్చు. Subsequent periods upward and downward. Upward and downward. Again upward. This also should be directly credited to revaluation reserve account. Revaluation reserve account. And here downward revaluation. Again we have to consider these things. First time upward revaluation. Further time downward revaluation. First time upward revaluation or revaluation reserve అనేది క్రియేట్ చేసామండి. It may realize more, but we are unable to realize so. Then అనవసరంగా రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ క్రియేట్ చేసాం కదండి. అనవసరంగా అసెట్ వాల్యూ ఎక్కువ వస్తుంది, ఈ రోజు మనం సేల్ చేస్తే ఎక్కువ వాల్యూ రియలైజ్ అవుతుంది అన్న ఉద్దేశంతో మనం ఏం చేసాం? రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ అనేది క్రియేట్ చేసాం. Are we able to realize that amount now? No. We are unable to realize that amount now. Then already unnecessary credited to revaluation reserve account, that should be cancelled. If that is of downward revaluation, here revaluation profit is less than or equal to revaluation loss. Revaluation profit is less than or equal to revaluation loss. ఆల్రెడీ మనం క్రెడిట్ చేసినటువంటిది ఈరోజు మనం డెబిట్ చేసేదానికన్నా తక్కువ ఉంది లేదా ఈక్వల్గా ఉంది. ఓకే, టు ద ఎక్స్టెంట్ ఆఫ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ To the extent of revaluation profit, what we can do? To the extent of revaluation profit which have been recognized earlier, that should be written off, right? That should be written off. To the extent of revaluation profit recognized earlier, ఆల్రెడీ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ అని రాసామండి, అది ఇప్పుడు రియలైజ్ చేసుకోగలుగుతున్నావా? డౌన్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ జరిగింది, ఇప్పుడు దాన్ని మనం రియలైజ్ చేసుకోగలుగుతున్నావా? రియలైజ్ చేసుకోగలుగుతున్నాం అండి? రియలైజ్ చేసుకోలేకపోతున్నాం కాబట్టి అన్నెసరీగా రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ క్రియేట్ చేసాం, దాన్ని ఇప్పుడు క్యాన్సిల్ చేయాలి, అవునా? టు ద ఎక్స్టెంట్ ఆఫ్ earlier recognized revaluation profit to be written off, and any excess revaluation loss, what shall we do for? That's a loss, right? Loss can be recognized, right? Then revaluation loss can be directly debited to P&L account. That's a loss. That should be directly debited to P&L account. To the extent of revaluation profit already recognized as revaluation reserve, that can be written off, and any excess revaluation loss, that should be debited to P&L account. That's not the amount that's the amount to be written off, but not written off. ఆల్రెడీ రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేయవలసినటువంటి పోర్షన్ ఇంకా రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేయలేదు, ఈరోజు రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేస్తున్నాం. ఎలా రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేస్తున్నాం? P&L అకౌంట్కి ట్రాన్స్ఫర్ చేయడం ద్వారా రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేస్తున్నాం, ఓకేనా? అండ్ నెక్స్ట్ డౌన్వర్డ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్. అగైన్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఈజ్ గ్రేటర్ దాన్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్. రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఈజ్ గ్రేటర్ దాన్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్. రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ అనేది రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ కన్నా ఎక్కువ ఉందండి. ఇప్పుడు పరిస్థితి ఏంటి? రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ వరకు రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేస్తే సరిపోతుంది కదా, రిమైనింగ్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ అలాగే ఉంటుంది కదా, అవునా? సో ద రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ షుడ్ బి రిటన్ ఆఫ్ by utilizing revaluation reserve. టోటల్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ని రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ని యూజ్ చేసుకొని రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేస్తాం. ఇంకా ఎనీ ఎక్సెస్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ ఆఫ్టర్ రైటింగ్ ఆఫ్ ద then that should be continued as the liability. That should be continued as the ఓనర్స్ ఫండ్గా కంటిన్యూ అవుతూ ఉంటుందండి, ఓకేనా? దిస్ ఈజ్ ద థింగ్. ఈజ్ దట్ క్లియర్? సో హిస్టారికల్ కాస్ట్ క్లియర్. నెక్స్ట్ ఎనీ అదర్ వాల్యూ రీప్లేసెస్ ద హిస్టారికల్ కాస్ట్, దట్ ఈస్ నథింగ్ బట్ రీవాల్యూడ్ ఫిగర్. దీస్ ఆర్ కంప్లీటెడ్. నెక్స్ట్ వాట్ అబౌట్ ద రిమైనింగ్? Depreciation. We have to provide the depreciation. Depreciation is nothing but we already discussed, right? What is meant by depreciation? What is meant by depreciation? Diminishing the value of the asset by utilization. Any fixed asset which have been utilized, the portion of the fixed asset which have been utilized should be treated as depreciation. The portion of the fixed asset, the portion of depreciable asset which is of utilized is said to be the depreciation. Depreciation should be deducted, then you will get book value. You will get the book value, net book value. Now these can be sold, right? These can be disposed of. Fixed assets can be retained or disposed of. What is meant by retain? What's meant by retain? And what's meant by dispose? retirement or disposal of fixed asset. Disposal of fixed asset. What's the accounting treatment here? What's the accounting treatment? What's the accounting treatment here? You are selling an asset. You are selling an asset. While selling the asset, you should consider whether that is depreciable asset, non-depreciable asset, depreciable asset, non-depreciable asset. Fixed assets may be depreciable or non-depreciable. If that is of depreciable asset, if that is of depreciable asset, if the sale proceeds are more than the book value, if the sale proceeds are more than the book value, that is said to be profit, right? Whether that's a revenue profit or capital profit, whether that's a capital profit or revenue profit. Be careful here. How can you compute the loss? Book value minus sale proceeds. Value ఎంత ఉంది మన దగ్గర అసెట్ యొక్క వాల్యూ ఎంత ఉంది దాన్ని అదే వాల్యూకి సేల్ చేస్తే ఐ గెటింగ్ ఎనీ ప్రాఫిట్ ఆర్ ఐ గెటింగ్ ఎనీ లాస్? నో. నో ప్రాఫిట్ నో లాస్ సిచ్యుయేషన్. ఇఫ్ సేల్ ప్రొసీడ్స్ గ్రేటర్ దాన్ బుక్ వాల్యూ, సేల్ ప్రొసీడ్స్ greater than book value, then that is of profit. That is of profit. Here profit, how can you compute the profit? Sale proceeds minus book value. Sale proceeds ఎంతైతే ఎక్కువ ఉన్నాయో దాన్ని బుక్ వాల్యూ కన్నా సేల్ ప్రొసీడ్స్ ఎంతైతే ఎక్కువ ఉన్నాయో దాన్ని మనం ఏమంటామండి? ప్రాఫిట్ అంటాం. Here this profit may be capital profit or revenue profit. Capital profit or revenue profit. What is capital profit and what is the revenue profit? Are you getting? Then here historical cost. Sale proceeds are less than or equal to historical cost of depreciable asset. మనం ఆల్రెడీ ఏ వాల్యూ దగ్గర అయితే అక్వైర్ చేసామో దానికన్నా తక్కువ కానీ దానికి ఈక్వల్గా కానీ ఉంటే అప్పుడు ఏమవుతుందండి? ఎంటైర్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఈజ్ రెవెన్యూ ఇన్ నేచర్. రెవెన్యూ ఇన్ నేచర్. ఎందుకు రెవెన్యూ ఇన్ నేచర్ అంటున్నాం? ఆల్రెడీ బుక్ వాల్యూ అంటే ఏంటండి? అది కాస్ట్ మైనస్ డిప్రిషియేషన్ ప్రొవైడెడ్, కాస్ట్ మైనస్ అక్యుములేటెడ్ డిప్రిషియేషన్. Accumulated depreciation we have debited to P&L account. Here you are recovering that amount. That's less than cost. Less than cost means you are recovering the accumulated depreciation, some portion of accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation లో కొంత పోర్షన్ మీరు కలెక్ట్ చేస్తున్నారు అంటే రికవరీ ఆఫ్ లాసే కదండి. రికవరీ ఆఫ్ లాసేనా? దట్స్ ఆఫ్ రెవెన్యూ నేచర్. ఆల్రెడీ you have debited to P&L account as depreciation. You are recovering that amount. Recovery of nominal expenditure, that means recovery of revenue item, that's of revenue in nature, right? You can directly credit it to P&L account. That's of revenue profit, revenue in nature, credited to P&L account. Profit to be credited to P&L account. If the sale price is greater than cost, any amount of profit to the extent of accumulated depreciation is to be treated as revenue profit, right? Already accumulated depreciation debit చేసాం, ఇప్పుడు దాన్ని రికవర్ చేసుకుంటున్నాం. దట్స్ ద రెవెన్యూ ప్రాఫిట్. ఎనీ అమౌంట్ రియలైజ్డ్ ఇన్ ఎక్సెస్ ఆఫ్ కాస్ట్, ఎనీ అమౌంట్ రియలైజ్డ్ in excess of cost, that's of capital in nature, right? That's of capital in, and here profit in excess of, profit to the extent of accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is to be treated as revenue in nature. Revenue in nature and credited to P&L account. Should be directly credited to P&L account as the recovery of accumulated depreciation. As the recovery of accumulated depreciation. Here, profit in excess of accumulated depreciation. Profit in excess of accumulated depreciation is to be treated as capital in nature. Capital in nature, that should be credited to, capital reserve. You are getting the capital profit, that's to be treated as capital reserve. That should be treated as capital reserve. What's the amount to be credited to capital reserve? Amount to be credited to capital reserve equal to sale proceeds in excess of cost kadamma. Antanandi, sale proceeds in excess of cost. That means sale proceeds minus cost. Sale proceeds minus cost can be directly credited to capital reserve. That should be treated as capital reserve, right? This is the information regarding to sale of a fixed asset which is of depreciable in nature. You may get the profit or you may get the loss. You may get the profit or you may get the loss. If you are having the profit, that is to be treated as, how can you treat that? You are getting more than cost, right? You are already having in your CPT relating to that. If you are selling the asset which is of non-depreciable nature at more than cost, the amount should be credited to capital reserve. The amount should be credited to capital reserve. Less than cost, that's to be treated as loss, right? That's to be treated as loss. That's a revenue loss itself. That's a revenue loss. Loss eppudu vastundandi? If sale proceeds are less than cost, be revalued. Earlier we have discussed about both the things, right? Revaluation. And here, if sale proceeds are less than cost, capital profit and should be credited to capital. Should be credited to capital reserve. Is that clear? This is about sale of fixed asset. If you are having an asset which is of outdated, or the economic life of such asset was come to end. You are holding that asset for some time for sale. You are holding that asset for sale. Held for sale. If any asset held for sale, అది ఆల్రెడీ ఫిక్స్డ్ అసెట్ అనేటటువంటి కండిషన్ అనేది పోయిందా అండి? ఫిక్స్డ్ అసెట్ అనే కండిషన్ ఫుల్ఫిల్ చేస్తుందా? చేయట్లా. ఇట్స్ నాట్ ద ఫిక్స్డ్ అసెట్. దెన్ దట్ కెన్ బి అకౌంటెడ్ ఫర్ ఎట్. If you are holding any asset for the purpose of sale, that can be accounted for at net realizable value. That can be accounted for at net realizable value. Any asset of which the economic life has been, the useful life has been completed, then that asset can be held for sale. That asset can be held for sale. At that time, that can be mentioned at net realizable value. That should be accounted for at net realizable value. Is that clear? That should be accounted for at net realizable value. This is about complete particulars of AS 10. Finally, if you have sold any asset which has been revalued, earlier we have treated that the asset sold, fixed asset sold, which is not revalued, which was not revalued. Now if you sold the asset which is of revalued, what's the accounting treatment? What's the accounting treatment? If you are getting any amount in excess of, that means if you are getting any loss, if you are getting any loss, then what's the process? If you have revalued the asset, sold for loss, at loss you have sold. Okay, it's already having revaluation reserve. If it's already having revaluation reserve, ఆ అసెట్కి సంబంధించి రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ ఏదైనా ఉన్నట్లయితే అప్పుడు ఏం చేయాలండి? ఆ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ అన్నెసరీగా రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్గా కన్సిడర్ చేసామా, దాన్ని క్లోజ్ చేయాలా? దట్ షుడ్ బి రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్ టు ద లాస్ అనేది రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ కన్నా ఎక్కువ ఉందా తక్కువ ఉందా అనేది చూడాలి, అవునా? ఇఫ్ లాస్ is less than or equal to, loss is less than or equal to revaluation reserve. Loss is less than or equal to revaluation reserve. Loss అనేది రివాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ కన్నా తక్కువ ఉందండి, ఏం చేయాలా? మొత్తం రైట్ ఆఫ్ చేయొచ్చా రివాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ని యూజ్ చేసుకొని? ఎంటైర్ లాస్ కెన్ బి రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్, ఎంటైర్ లాస్ కెన్ బి రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్ by using revaluation reserve, by using revaluation reserve. If revaluation profit is, if loss is greater than revaluation reserve, loss is greater than revaluation reserve, then what's the thing? To the extent of revaluation reserve, to the extent of revaluation reserve, you can return off, we can, sorry, to the extent of loss is greater than revaluation reserve, to the extent of revaluation reserve you can return off. Okay, and the excess loss can be debited to P&L account. Excess loss ఏం చేయాలి? P&L account కి డెబిట్ చేయాలి. ఆల్రెడీ అన్నెసరీగా రీవాల్యుయేషన్ రిజర్వ్ కన్సిడర్ చేసాం, దట్ షుడ్ బి రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్. ఎనీ ఎక్సెస్ లాస్ దట్ షుడ్ బి యాక్చువల్లీ రిటర్న్ ఆఫ్ యాజ్ యూటిలైజ్డ్ పోర్షన్, రైట్? యూటిలైజ్డ్ పోర్షన్ మీన్స్ expenditure. Utilized portion means expenditure, we already discussed earlier. It's the utilized portion that is said to be the loss that can be considered, that can be considered in P&L account. If now sold for profit, sold for profit, ప్రాఫిట్కి సేల్ చేస్తే రెగ్యులర్ అండి. ఆల్రెడీ లాస్గా కన్సిడర్ చేస్తుంటే ఏం చేయాలా? ఆల్రెడీ లాస్ ఉంది, రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ ఉంది, ఆల్రెడీ P&L అకౌంట్కి ఛార్జ్ చేసాం. ఇక్కడ వచ్చేవాడి ప్రాఫిట్ మొత్తం ఏమైంది? ప్రాఫిట్ మళ్ళీ ఇక్కడ ఏం చేయాలా? ఇక్కడ ఏం చేయాలి? రెవెన్యూ ప్రాఫిట్ ఏంటి, క్యాపిటల్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఏంటి అనేది కన్సిడర్ చేయాలి. అక్యుములేటెడ్ డిప్రిషియేషన్ మేరకు సేమ్ థింగ్, ఎర్లియర్ మనం ఎలా అయితే అకౌంట్ ఫర్ చేసామో అదే విధంగా అకౌంట్ ఫర్ చేయాలి, అదే విధంగా అకౌంట్ ఫర్ చేయాలి. లాస్ కన్సిడర్ చేస్తున్నాం, ఇక్కడ ప్రాఫిట్ కన్సిడర్ చేస్తున్నాం. ఆల్రెడీ లాస్ ఏం చేసాం? డెబిట్ చేసాం. ఇప్పుడు రికవరీ ఆఫ్ లాసే కదా, నథింగ్ బట్ క్రెడిట్ చేస్తాం, ప్రాఫిట్ క్రెడిట్ చేస్తాం. ఒకవేళ అర్లియర్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ లాస్ ఉంటే, అర్లియర్ రీవాల్యుయేషన్ ప్రాఫిట్ ఉంటే, it's not necessary to consider, right? We are getting the amount, it's a revaluation, it's a realized profit that can be directly credited to profit to the extent of accumulated depreciation should be credited to P&L account. More than that, sale proceeds in excess of cost should be credited to capital reserve, not the revaluation reserve. We are not revaluing, we have already realized that amount. That's a capital profit in nature, which is in excess of sale proceeds in excess of cost. Sale proceeds in excess of cost are to be treated as capital profit. That should be credited to capital reserve. Okay na? These are the things. In excess of these, we are having some other items. You are acquired in case of acquisition. You are acquired for cash, you are acquired for kind. Some special transactions will also be there, right? Special transactions will also be there. What are the special transactions here? Asset may be acquired on the basis of hire purchase. Hire purchase basis lo purchase cheyachandi. The fixed assets may be acquired by combination of two or more persons, jointly owned property ayi undochandi. If you are acquired on hire purchase basis, then at which value you have to account for? The fixed asset. Are you getting? Special acquired in special manner. Any asset acquired in special manner lo acquire cheste paristhiti enti? If acquired on hire purchase basis, at which value you have to account for such asset? Such asset should be accounted for at cash price. What is meant by cash price? Nothing but if you acquired the asset by paying entire amount at a time, you need to pay cash, right? Okay, you need to pay cash directly for the entire amount. So that is said to be the cash price. Cash price is nothing but initial payment. First, at the time of acquisition, first payment కొంత చేస్తామండి, రిమైనింగ్ అంతా వేరియస్ ఇన్స్టాల్మెంట్స్లో పే చేస్తాం, అవునా? ప్లస్ ఇన్స్టాల్మెంట్ అమౌంట్ మైనస్ ఇంట్రెస్ట్. ఇన్స్టాల్మెంట్ అమౌంట్లో ఇంట్రెస్ట్ కూడా ఇంక్లూడ్ అయి ఉంటుందా? ఆ ఇంట్రెస్ట్ని డిడక్ట్ చేస్తే వచ్చేటటువంటిది ఏమవుతుందండి? క్యాష్ ప్రైజ్ అవుతుంది. దాన్ని ఇనిషియల్ పేమెంట్కి యాడ్ చేస్తే విల్ గెట్ ద క్యాష్ ప్రైజ్. At cash price we have to consider the asset. That means when you are required to compute the cost of the asset, then you should compute the cash price in case of hire purchase system. This should be accounted for as per AS 19. That's nothing but accounting for leases. AS 19 అప్లికబుల్ అవుతుందండి ఇక్కడ. ఓకే, కాకపోతే కాస్ట్ అనేది ఫైండ్ అవుట్ చేయాలి కదా, అది ఫిక్స్డ్ అసెటే కదా, కాస్ట్ని ఎలా అకౌంట్ ఫర్ చేయాలి అనేది మనం చూడాలి. ఓకేనా? నెక్స్ట్ jointly owned property. Jointly owned property. Ram, Lakshmana and Ravana, these three parties acquired a building that can be accounted for in proportionate basis. What's the share of Ram? What's the share of Lakshmana? What's the share of Ravana? Okay, each are having equivalent portion. Then the asset should be divided into three parts. That should not be divided into divided into three parts means you should not cut that. Okay, you should divide the value of the asset into three parts. Each and everyone should be accounted for their portion of the asset. Okay nandi, ila jointly owned property kanaka ayinatlaithe their portion should be classified separately and should be mentioned as the asset of such party. You have to find out the cost of each and every product, right? The cost of each and every product, each and every asset purchased by you. In the consolidated amount, you should find out the cost of each and every property. Okay. Group of assets purchased at a time. Car and building. As a group, bus, car and building as a group purchase chesam. We have acquired the entire amount for 1 crore. Okay. Otherwise, if you are unable to find out that, then how can you account for that thing? If you are unable to classify the value of, differentiate the value of each and everything, how can you account for these items? You have to take the support of valuer. You have to take the support of the valuer, competent valuer. By getting the support of him, you have to separate each and every item's value, each and every asset's value. Is that clear? These are the things in A STEM. Okay, first historical cost. What is meant by fixed asset? We all learned. Okay, and again, what are the situations when this is not applicable, this standard is not applicable? Next, how can you value the fixed asset? How can you account for the fixed asset? For that purpose, you have to know historical cost. What is meant by historical cost? Okay, that can be computed when that is of self-generated one, you can compute in some manner, and if you are acquired for cash, it's some other manner. If you are acquired for kind, it's some other manner. If you are acquired for kind, there are three ways. First one, you have exchanged for similar asset, not for similar asset, for securities. Okay, in each and everything we can compute some other manner. Okay, next, finally, revaluation process. Who can revalue? Okay, in general, at the time of revaluation, most of the cases, the group of assets can be revalued. The group of assets can be revalued. Otherwise, in a group of assets means all the buildings and all the machinery, that means block of machinery. Okay, block can be revalued. Otherwise, the selected items in the block should be revalued. Those are to be specified. Which are the assets revalued? ఏ అసెట్స్ అయితే రీవాల్యూ చేసామో వాటిని స్పెసిఫై చేయాలి. ఓకేనండి, అంటే గ్రూప్ మొత్తాన్ని రీవాల్యూ చేస్తే ప్రాబ్లం లేదు. అలా కాకుండా ఆ గ్రూప్లో ఏవో స్పెసిఫిక్ అసెట్స్ని మాత్రమే సెలెక్ట్ చేసి వాటిని మాత్రమే రీవాల్యూ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు ఏ అసెట్స్ని రీవాల్యూ చేసాం అనేది స్పెసిఫిక్గా మెన్షన్ చేయాలి. మెషినరీస్ 3 ఉన్నాయి, వాటిలో ఏ అసెట్స్ని ఏ మెషిన్ని మనం రీవాల్యూ చేసాం అనేది స్పెసిఫిక్గా మెన్షన్ చేయాలి. ఇస్ దట్ క్లియర్? సో దిస్ ద థింగ్. ఇప్పటి వరకు రీవాల్యుయేషన్ అనేది చూసామండి. ఐ మీన్ ఫిక్స్డ్ అసెట్స్కి సంబంధించి కంప్లీట్ ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ చూసాం. ఇప్పుడు వీటికి సంబంధించి వేటిని డిస్క్లోజ్ చేయాలి. We have learned the way. Earlier we have learned the way to reach a destination. What's the destination? We should mention, right? That is said to be the disclosure. That's said to be disclosure. What are the items should be disclosed? What are the items should be disclosed?